Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Winback, and on today's episode 3 of the beginner series for Grim Dawn, we're going to be talking a bit about damage, we're going to be talking about some stats, we're going to be talking about some build stuff. But I'll get this thing started with the casual YouTube spiel. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe your heart out, and then I'll show you what we've got built currently, as well as our devotions, our abilities, all that sort of stuff. But I did go to the vendor, bought a bunch of items to flesh out the build, make sure that we have all of our item slots filled out. We do have a couple components in each of them as well, some for stats, all that sort of thing. Nothing super heavy. And then we've got our force wave with 7 points, which I think is the most efficient amount of points you can put in something in the early game while you're still figuring things out, before you need to max it out, obviously. And then we've got Fire Strike, which is equipped to our left click, and that's basically going to take the place of our auto attacks. It's going to give us some physical, plus 4% physical damage, as well as a baseline fire damage to our autos. On top of that, we've got the Crossroads for a 5% health, and then we're going to start Tortoise to get 25 health and 12 defensive ability, pushing us up towards the Turtle Shell, which is going to give us a shield once we can get those devotion points in. And I'm going to mention to you right now, as far as devotion points go, I'm going to have a full video on where all of the devotion points are in Act 1, so you can go find them all in one go and farm them at one time if you need to. Other than the ones that we find just kind of along the way. So you don't have to worry too hard about that. We'll figure that out as it gets going. But yeah, other than all of that stuff, we're just going to keep pushing forward through the story, show off some of our sleek new gear, which we have freshly illusioned from the illusionist, spent the money to make us look less gross, because that is super important when you're making a video. You can't look awful. And I think the frame rate issue has been taken care of as well, so fingers crossed it doesn't chug any harder. Yeah, so all that being said, the damage types that we're going to start off, we won't start with the damage types. We're actually going to start with the offensive and defensive ability. So offensive and defensive ability are obviously two halves of the same coin. They are going to dictate how you fight with people. So offensive ability is going to determine your likelihood to hit a person, which you can miss. You can miss with abilities, you can miss with autos, you can miss all sorts of stuff. That is going to determine your crit percentage, or your crit chance, essentially, and then the amount of damage that your crits can do to a target that you hit. Now, your offensive ability cannot go below 60%, so you will always have a 60% chance to hit someone with any of your abilities or your autos. But just remember, with the amount of attacks that you will be doing with a lot of these builds, 60% is still not great. Not great. I mean, think of it in terms of a coin flip. If you have 50%, there is 1 out of 2 chances that you will miss. So 60% isn't a whole lot better. Yeah, but basically, the lower that your offensive ability is, the less likely that you are to do damage, and especially if you're playing something that is very auto-attack reliant, or kind of single hit reliant, you're going to want to have really high offensive ability to make sure that those abilities or those attacks land consistently and are critting for as much as possible. So there you go. That's offensive ability in a nutshell. Defensive ability is going to work, well, kind of the same way that offensive ability works. It's obviously got the same mechanics, but it also is going to work in conjunction with your armor rating. So we'll talk about kind of both of those things together. But ultimately, defensive ability is going to reduce your chance to be hit, which can't be, again, taken below 60%. And then it's also going to decrease the likelihood of you getting crit and the amount of damage that you are crit with. So literally the exact opposite of offensive ability, but on top of offensive ability, you're also going to get armor rating to come in and kind of back up defensive ability. But that being said, armor rating is what your character will get from your gear. So all of that is it's gear dependent, and then your armor rating will actually follow each of the 5 pieces of gear that you have. So your helmet, your armor, legs, gloves, and shoulders, I think is what it is. Well, there's a lot that goes into armor rating. Basically, just think of it this way: your armor rating is how you are going to prevent physical damage from happening to you. So physical damage is, there's a couple different types of physical damage, but basically just boil it down to your auto attacks. Being hit by monsters with physical damage will be number 1, decided by defensive ability, and then if you are actually going to be hit, your armor rating will your armor rating will decide how much of that damage you are actually going to take and how much of that damage is going to be absorbed by your armor. So if you're at all familiar with playing like Warhammer 40k and rolling through to wound, to hit, all that stuff, yeah, it's very similar. Very, very similar. But all that being said, that takes us into physical damage and the damage types. So we can start off with all that stuff, which is just a deep-ass conversation in and of itself. But physical damage, the most basic type of damage, is going to be cut up into 4 different kinds of physical damage. Number 1 is physical. That's just your auto attack, your point and click, whack people. That's it. Your whack damage is your physical damage. Now, beyond that, all damage types have a damage over time version. So physical damage has a damage over time version in the form of trauma, internal trauma damage. So when you're hitting, or when you're hitting with internal trauma damage, you're still hitting with physical damage, but it's now going to happen over a certain amount of time. Typically, the dot damage is going to be higher, but since it happens over a longer period, it will happen slower, because, that's how time works. Anyway, so physical damage and then internal trauma damage are the regular and the damage over time versions of that. On top of that, the other 2 physical types of damage are going to be piercing damage, which is damage that is physical but will ignore a percentage of armor. So piercing damage is how you overcome enemies with really high armor. And then bleeding damage is the damage over time version of that. So your physical damage types are physical, pierce, bleed, and trauma, and your armor, as well as your defensive ability, all that stuff is going to apply to stopping those in one form or the other. Now, magical damage is going to be split up into well, overall, there is magic damage, and that incorporates, I think there's a lot of different types of magical damage. We'll just leave it at that. But the basic forms that don't get categorized outside of magical are going to be vitality, aether, chaos, and acid damage. All 4 of those types of damage do have a damage over time version as well, but they don't fall into the elemental category. Elemental being lightning, cold, and fire. Now, the reason that there is even this distinction is because elemental damage is something that you can get on a weapon, or as far as resistances go, you can get elemental resistances and elemental damage, and that is actually going to give that percentage of damage to all 3 of those damage types. So lightning, cold, and fire, you can actually get all 3 of those damage types buffed with one item, or resistances with one, whatever the case may be. If it says elemental, it's giving you all 3, which is fantastic for characters who like those stats. But the opposite end of the spectrum, obviously, there are items that will dive a lot harder into one lightning, cold, or fire. But anyway, as far as the magical damage types go, vitality is so it's vitality, and then vitality decay is the damage over time version. Aether... Actually, Aether and Chaos don't have damage over time variants. Aether and Chaos damage are on their own, which is a little bit interesting now that I'm actually thinking about it. But Aether and Chaos are damage types that you get that are actually based around enemies in the game. So Aether damage comes from the Ether, which is where the Ethereals come from. And then Chaos damage comes from the Kethonian side of things. We're going to run into some Kethonian cultists here very shortly, but just remember there's two very big space demon enemies in Cairn, in the world of Grim Dawn, and they are the Ethereals and the Kethonians, and both of them have damage types that are magical, one being Aether, one being Chaos. Neither of them have a damage over time aspect as well, so remember that part. But the other magical type, Acid, the damage over time version of that is Poison. Nice and easy. You'll probably remember Poison before you remember Acid, but same thing. Poison damage, if you just need some straight up bursty damage that is still in that magical type, you want to go for Acid. And then Lightning, Cold, and Fire. Lightning damage over time is Electrocute. Cold damage over time is Frostburn. And then fire damage over time is just Burn. Burn. So all of those damage types you will see very often. You'll see them in items. You'll see them in abilities. You will see them in devotions. You'll see them in enemies. You see them everywhere because damage is, half of the game, right? Part of it is doing damage. The other part is taking damage. You're welcome. Yeah, so, in a nutshell, that's how damage and offensive/defensive ability works. I know it was kind of long-winded, and it took most of the video, but really, all we're doing right now is killing Milton Hart. So, we're just going to pick up his amulet, pick up some monster infrequents, looks like. And then we'll turn this into his sister later to get the quest completed. Milton Hart is right next to Julius the Decayed, I think it is. But he's a lightning zombie. You'll find him over to the right in a little encampment. And then once I am done looking at all this gear, swapping stuff out, we'll go over there, whack him, get that quest portion completed as well. Oh, right. So, as far as damage goes, damage types are really going to be how you decide to play your character. Because of the way that your abilities work and your classes work, all of that stuff is kind of... So, in terms of the classes and the damage themselves, you're probably not going to want to play like something like a straight necromancer with fire damage, or fire or lightning damage. You could end up playing a necromancer with cold damage because they have a lot of abilities that will scale off of cold damage. But if you're making the decision to do that, you really want to take into account the damage types that you're choosing. So don't pick something that's just going to conflict completely with the two character classes that you have. But on the same token, you can use the two classes that you have to offset the missing portion of damage that your other classes have. So your necromancers are going to be vitality damage, cold damage, and I think acid damage. Those are like the three most prevalent in their kit. So if you wanted to have something like fire and physical in your kit on top of those things, you would take a necromancer and you would couple it with an oathkeeper, and then therein you have access to those three damage types I just mentioned, as well as physical, fire, and internal trauma. So you can kind of mix and match the items that you're building for, the damage types that you're building for, and all that stuff will feel less useless. And this is the final zombie in the quest from Harmond, Negan the Withered. He is always going to be standing there. Same with Julius and Negan, Julius. I can't remember the first one's name. Pharos the Rotted, who is always hanging out in that one place in Lower Crossing like we found earlier. But that quest is done. Sybil Hart's quest is done as well. And then, what else have we got to do? Oh, yes. This is, this little hut is a cult hut. This is a Kethonian cult. You're seeing the Bloodsworn. This is the first time that we're going to run into them in the game, which is a little bit weird because they do play a huge part in the game, but it is pretty good as far as pacing is concerned. So there is a trapdoor in the bottom of this hut. We're just going to climb down in there and go kill some cultists. Now, the Kethonians, their whole reason for being is kind of like scorched earth. Like, ethereals are invading, they're taking over people's bodies. Their ethereals are they want to use this as meat puppets, whereas the Kethonians, when you join that cult, you're basically joining a cult. But you are saying that the Kethonian god, what is, it's not Cthulhu. I can't remember. Can't remember his name at the moment. But basically, they believe that all people come from Chthon. That's it. Chthon is the one who gave life to everything through his blood. So the reason that they're called the Bloodsworn and the reason that they're doing everything that they're doing is to send all the people of Cairn back to Chthon by bleeding them dry, killing the shit out of everything, and then going back home to be one with Chthon, which is just creepy in and of itself. Yeah. So anyway, the story as it is, super fun, super dark. And the further that you get into the expansions, you actually get to see even more and more stuff beyond there. Because there's this whole pantheon of gods in Grim Dawn as well. And they play a kind of passive part in the lore on top of that. It's really funny just how deep and good the story for this game is, as long as you're paying attention to it. So if you're into it for the lore, I definitely suggest to check it out. But if you're just in it to slice and dice monsters, we got those too. We got a lot of those too. Now, we're only level 12 at the moment. We haven't actually hit the level 14 that I need to use a lot of the epic items, which is kind of sad. I was hoping I'd get to that point by this video, but I guess not. We're going to go pick up that mutagenic ichor real fast. But one thing you may want to do, too, in terms of figuring out your build and what abilities you're going to be using when playing this game, they don't read very well. Some of the descriptions for the abilities are kind of junk. So you'll want to use them to really see what they do and see if that's a thing that you want to do. But when you are hovering over the abilities, skill recharge is a thing that'll be brought up a lot, and that's just your cooldown for the ability. You're also going to see... it'll show you like radius. It'll show you the exact damage type and the percentage of damage that it does. If you see a damage percent on the ability, but you don't see something that says like X damage, like fire damage, it's not going to give like base damage. It's just going to increase the amount of base damage that you are doing with that damage type. So, let's see. I think Fire Strike, which is our current auto attack our left click, it is giving us a base flat damage increase of like 7 fire damage. So all of our attacks, or all of our basic attacks, are going to have a 7 fire damage on top of them. In addition to that, it gives us 4% bonus physical damage. So whatever our current physical damage is right now is going to be increased by another 4% because we have the ability being used right now. So I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, but you can kind of figure out the more that you play the game how it works. And as you get towards the end game, you'll get up into the thousands of percent increases to the damage types and all that stuff. So the more you play, the more you'll understand, but that's kind of just a cursory explanation. And then in the Foggy Bank here, Luther Graves, the guy trapped in the cage by this lip, is always going to be in the Foggy Bank. You can see him up there in the compass. He's a little star. But he is always in this place. You can always rescue him. He is going to give you a bunch of XP, and he becomes a vendor, which is super useful in the early game anyway. Because he'll sell you stuff. Everybody who sells you stuff early on is helpful. But he can spawn in random locations in this part of the map. So remember he's there. Remember to look for him, but you do have to do some digging on your own. There is also... Oh, there's just a random pair of molten walkers laying on the ground. I already have those, but... you're seeing these caves while we walk around, too. They're kind of... they're just big blue cave entrances. Nailed it. They are actually going to be randomly generated. The locations that they spawn at are... they're limited. There's only like 2 or 3 locations that they can spawn at, but every time that you load up the game that you need to go down into one of those, you'll have to kind of happen upon it. Specifically, I'm waiting to do those so that I can, again, just do the shrine video, knock them all out in one go, but there are a lot of devotion shrines in those things. And clearing them all is going to be really important for getting the most devotion points, which is going to further scale your character beyond your abilities and your gear. So remember to do that. You can do it the way I'm doing it, like knock them all out in one go, or you can explore and find them all your own. It doesn't super matter early on, but the further that the game goes, your devotions have a lot of resistances and passive effects assigned to them on top of some of the abilities that they have. So that is really good for either keeping you alive or helping you do damage if you've already got a lot of tankiness or resistances built in. Right now, what we're doing is looking for Isaac's hidden stash before we end the video. Isaac was the guy that the Kethonians cut up in the underground basement, so they couldn't save him, but he's like, thanks for trying. You can have all my fucking stuff, and now I'm gonna die. So there it is. It is always in this spot. It is always... on the left side of the map, so you just got to walk over here, and then Isaac's Spaulders are a unique item. They're not a monster infrequent, because Isaac isn't a monster, but I'm actually going to spend a little bit grinding up to level 14 so we can equip these blue items, but yeah, that's going to do it for this video. We'll be back next time. Here is the build that we currently have. We got the Blackwater Cocktail, so we can have some actual fire damage in our build, but there is... there's Blitz as well. That's going to be a movement ability that I forgot to equip, but that'll really start to put a finer point on the melee build. Regardless, I'll see you guys there.